A night to remember. I invited my friends over for a fun girls' night in. It had been a while since we'd all hung out, so I was really looking forward to it. Jenny, Sana and Mia arrived around 6, and we started the evening with a nice dinner. We ate well, laughed, and shared stories from our week. After dinner, we opened a couple of bottles of wine, put on some music, and the conversation turned to the usual girl talk, school, crushes and gossip. As the night wore on, we decided to watch some YouTube videos. Jenny was always the one with a taste for the spooky, suggested we watch a video about Ouija boards. The video was filled with creepy tales and eerie encounters, and it sent shivers down our spines. "Have you ever played Spirit of the Glass?" Jenny asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. We all had, back in elementary school. The memories of those times were filled with more laughter than fear, but the wine had loosened us up, and we were in the mood for a thrill. "Why not?" I said, feeling adventurous. We drew a makeshift Ouija board on a piece of paper, fetched a small glass from the kitchen, and lit some tea lights to set the mood. We turned off the lights, and the room was bathed in the soft glow of the candles. It felt like we were in a different world, one where anything could happen. We placed our fingers lightly on the glass and asked the usual questions. "Who are you? What's your name? Is anyone here with us?" But nothing happened. The glass remained still. After a few more minutes of silence, we gave up. "This is boring," Mia said, turning the lights back on. We decided to watch a movie instead, something light to shake off the eerie feeling from the Ouija video. We sat on the couch, sipping wine and laughing at the movie. About halfway through, Sana flinched. "Something touched my hair," she said, with a shaky voice. We paused the film and looked around, but saw nothing. "You're probably imagining things," Jenny said, but I could see the unease in her eyes. We resumed watching the movie, but the atmosphere had changed. Sana suddenly jumped up from the sofa. Her face was pale from fear. "It happened again! Something touched my hair!" she insisted. Mia tried to calm her down, saying she was just imagining things. But before she could finish, we all heard it. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable, running out of the room. We bolted upright, our hearts racing. "What the hell was that?" Mia asked. "See, I told you something is happening," Sana cried. Suddenly, the glass we used for the Ouija game flew off the table and shattered against the wall. We screamed and huddled together, too terrified to move. The tea lights flickered wildly, and then one by one, they went out. The room was plunged into darkness. Objects started moving around the room. Books flew off the shelves, the TV remote floated in the air, and the picture frames rattled violently against the walls. It was chaos, and we were in the middle of it, powerless and petrified. "We need to get out of here!" Jenny shouted over the noise. We scrambled to the door, tripping over each other in our panic. As we reached the hallway, the front door slammed shut on its own. We were trapped. Mia's voice was shaking as she suggested we try the back door. We made our way through the dark, cluttered kitchen, dodging flying utensils and crashing dishes. Just as we reached the back door, it too slammed shut. The windows were next, but they wouldn't budge, as if an unseen force was holding them closed. "We have to stay together," I yelled, trying to keep everyone from losing their heads. "We'll find a way out." A loud bang echoed through the house, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps coming from the stairs. We turned to see a shadowy figure at the top, slowly descending. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. "Run!" I screamed. We darted back into the living room, the footsteps getting louder and closer. Desperation took over as we tried to find another way out. The lights flickered, and in those brief moments of illumination, we saw the figure moving towards us. Sana grabbed a chair and threw it at the window, shattering the glass. "This way!" she screamed. We scrambled through the broken window, ignoring the cuts and bruises as we stumbled into the yard. We didn't stop running until we reached the end of the block, panting and crying. "Let's go to my house," Mia said. We sprinted the rest of the way, adrenaline propelling us forward. When we burst into Mia's house, her parents were waiting, clearly upset by our sudden and chaotic entrance. "What's going on?" her dad demanded. We tried to explain, our words tumbling over each other in a frantic mess. He didn't believe us at first, but the fear in our eyes and the urgency in our voices convinced him to let us stay. We huddled together in Mia's room, too scared to sleep. Her parents eventually went back to bed, but we stayed up, jumping at every little sound. We knew we weren't imagining things. Something had happened in that house, something we couldn't explain. As the first light of dawn broke, we finally started to relax. Exhausted, we fell asleep in a tangled pile on Mia's floor. The next day, I had to explain to my parents what had happened in the house. They were angry and thought we had somehow gone mad from the alcohol and wrecked the place. I felt sad that they didn't believe me. But after talking to Mia's parents, who convinced them something strange must have happened that night, they changed their minds. Mia's parents said they had never seen anyone as scared as we were that night. Years later, I still wonder what we unleashed that night, and if it ever truly left us. The Glass Whisperer. One chilly October evening, my friend Richard and I decided to have a quiet night at my house. Richard and I were best friends since childhood, bonded by our shared love of the supernatural. As 17-year-olds with active imaginations, we often discuss ghosts, spirits, and other eerie phenomena. That evening, we planned to watch some horror movies and maybe delve into something spookier. "Have you ever tried Spirit of the Glass?" Richard asked, a hint of mischief in his voice. I hadn't, but I'd heard of it. It was a simpler version of using a Ouija board, and the stories associated with it were enough to send shivers down my spine. Despite my apprehensions, curiosity won out. We scavenged the house for supplies, a piece of paper, a pen, and a small clear glass. We settled at the kitchen table, the heart of my home now transformed into a place of mystery. We drew out the alphabet, numbers 0 to 9, and the words yes and no on the paper, placing the glass in the center. The kitchen was dimly lit by a few flickering candles, their flames casting scary shadows around the room. We placed our fingertips lightly on the glass, ready to start. "Is anyone here?" Richard asked, his voice steady but low. We waited, the silence thickening with each passing second. At first, nothing happened. We repeated the question, and still, there was no movement. A part of me was relieved. Another part was disappointed. "Let's ask again," I suggested. "Maybe we need to be more patient." We asked a few more questions, our enthusiasm waning with each unanswered query. Just as we were about to give up, the glass trembled under our fingers. My heart skipped a beat, and I glanced at Richard. His eyes shined with excitement. "Who are you?" Richard asked, barely containing his excitement. The glass moved slowly, spelling out the name Tom. "Tom, are you a good spirit?" I asked, feeling cold chill travel down my spine. The glass shifted to yes. "Why are you here?" Richard inquired. The glass started to spell out a message, HELP. We exchanged nervous glances. "How can we help you?" I asked. The glass spelled out DANGER. A sense of unease settled over us. "What danger?" Richard pressed. The glass spelled out DEMON, demon. Richard and I looked at each other, our earlier excitement now replaced with a growing sense of dread. "Are you in danger?" I asked. The glass moved to yes. "What can we do?" Richard asked. The glass spelled out STOP. "Stop what?" I asked. The glass didn't move. Frustrated, Richard asked again, "Stop what, Tom?" This time, the glass spelled out LEAVE. We hesitated. "Should we leave the house?" I asked. The glass moved to yes. "I don't like this," Richard muttered. "Maybe we should listen." Before we could decide what to do, the lights flickered. We both jumped, looking around nervously. The air felt colder, and I could sense an unsettling presence. Suddenly, we heard a faint whisper, though we couldn't make out the words. "Did you hear that?" I asked. My voice was trembling of fear. "Yeah," Richard replied. "Let's just go." We stood up, but the glass moved on its own, spelling out TOOLATE. Panic set in. "What do you mean, too late?" Richard asked, but there was no response. The glass remained still. As we debated whether to stay or go, strange things began happening. The candles flickered violently, and then, one by one, they went out, plunging the room into darkness. We fumbled to turn on the lights, but they wouldn't work. A low, guttural growl echoed through the kitchen. We froze, listening intently. The sound grew louder, coming closer. Suddenly, something invisible brushed past us, knocking over a chair. "Let's get out of here!" Richard shouted. We bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before we could reach it. We tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Desperate, we grabbed the nearest object to defend ourselves, not knowing what we were up against. The growling grew louder, more menacing. Suddenly, a dark figure appeared in the corner of the room. It had glowing red eyes. It moved toward us, slow but deliberate. "Stay back!" I shouted, holding up a chair. The figure didn't stop. Richard threw a book at it, but it passed right through, hitting the wall. The entity lunged at us, and we stumbled backward, crashing into the table. "We need to break the connection!" Richard shouted. "Destroy the paper!" I grabbed the paper we used as a spirit board and lit it on fire, wincing as the flames licked my fingers, and tossed it into the sink, dousing it with water. The room plunged back into darkness. The growling stopped, and the oppressive presence lifted. We stood there, scared as hell. The lights flickered back on, and we surveyed the wreckage of my kitchen. The glass was shattered, the chairs overturned. "What the hell just happened?" I asked, still in shock. "I don't know," Richard replied, his voice shaking. "But we're never doing that again." We cleaned up the mess in silence, both of us too shaken to talk about what we had experienced. As we finished, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us, waiting for another chance to strike. Days passed, and we tried to return to normalcy. But the memory of that night haunted us. Richard and I made a pact to never speak of it again, hoping that ignoring it would make it go away. But late at night, when the house was silent and the shadows seemed to move on their own, I couldn't help but wonder if we had truly rid ourselves of whatever we had awakened. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint whisper. My eyes snapped open, and I listened intently. The whispering grew louder, forming words that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm still here." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. I looked around my room, but saw nothing. The whispering continued, now right next to my ear. "You cannot escape." I leapt out of bed and ran to Richard's house, pounding on his door until he answered, groggy and confused. "What's wrong?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "It's back," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We need to do something." Richard and I spent the next day researching how to banish spirits. We found a local paranormal expert who agreed to help us. We explained what had happened, and she listened carefully, nodding. "You've opened a door," she said, "and now you need to close it properly." She gave us instructions on a ritual to banish the spirit, and we prepared ourselves for one final confrontation. That evening, we gathered the necessary items and returned to my house, determined to end this once and for all. We set up the ritual in the living room, following her instructions to the letter. As we began the incantation, the temperature in the room dropped, and we could feel the spirit's presence growing stronger. Suddenly, the dark figure appeared again, more menacing than before. Its eyes glowed with fury, and it let out a bone-chilling scream. "We're not afraid of you!" Richard shouted, holding up a talisman the expert had given us. The figure recoiled, and we continued the incantation, our voices growing louder. The figure writhed and twisted, and then it opened its mouth to an unnaturally large gap. With one final ear-piercing scream, it vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence. The room warmed up, and the oppressive feeling lifted. We looked at each other, exhausted but relieved. "Is it over?" I asked. Richard answered, "I think so." We sat down onto the couch, finally able to breathe easily. The house felt normal again, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. As the days turned into weeks, the haunting presence never returned. Richard and I remained close. We kept our promise to never speak of it again, but the experience had changed us. Years passed, and Richard and I went our separate ways for college. Despite the distance, we kept in touch, always remembering the night we faced the unknown together. One evening, while on a video call with Richard, we reminisced about our high school days. The topic of that fateful night was carefully avoided, as always. But as we were about to end the call, Richard's face grew serious. "Do you ever feel like it's still with us?" he asked. I paused, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes, when I'm alone, I hear whispers, and the temperature drops suddenly, just like it did that night." A chill ran down my spine. I thought it was over. "Maybe it never truly is," Richard said, his voice tinged with fear. "Maybe it left a mark on us." We ended the call, both of us unsettled by the conversation. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The room grew colder, and I heard a faint whisper, "I'm still here." Haunted from the past. I've held this story inside for decades, but the time has come to share it. It was the 80s, and I was just 11 years old. At my school and on the schoolyard was where we spent our recesses daring each other to do stupid things. But nothing we ever did was as stupid as that day when we played Spirit of the Glass. It was a typical autumn afternoon. The leaves had turned vibrant shades of red and gold, and there was a chill in the air that hinted winter was on its way. School had just ended, and the final bell echoed through the halls. I lingered behind with a few friends, Tim, Linnea, and Mark. We were a tight-knit group, always looking for ways to entertain ourselves after hours. We'd been hearing whispers about a game that could supposedly contact spirits. Tim was the one who brought it up that day. He had a knack for finding trouble, and his older brother had told him about the game. All we needed was a piece of paper, a pen, and a small glass. "Have you guys heard of Spirit of the Glass?" Tim asked as we huddled near the lockers. Linnea and I shook our heads. Mark looked intrigued. "My brother played it with his friends. You write letters and numbers on a piece of paper, put your fingers on a glass, and ask questions. The spirits move the glass to answer," Tim explained. It sounded like a load of nonsense, but we were kids, and anything remotely spooky piqued our interest. We decided to give it a shot, meeting in the boys' bathroom after the last bell. The bathroom was old, with cracked tiles and flickering fluorescent lights. It was the perfect setting for a ghost story. Tim pulled out a sheet of paper and scribbled the alphabet, numbers, and the words yes and no on it. We gathered around as he placed the paper on the floor and set a small glass in the center. We each placed a finger on the glass, the cool surface sending a shiver up my spine. "Spirit, if you're here, please give us a sign," Tim said. For a moment, nothing happened. I glanced at Linnea and Mark, wondering if we should give up. Just as I was about to suggest we stop, the glass began to move. It was subtle at first, a slow, deliberate slide across the paper. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you guys feel that?" Linnea asked, her eyes wide. "Yeah," Mark said. "Keep going, Tim." "Spirit, what is your name?" Tim asked. The glass moved to the letters, spelling out MAX. "Max," Linnea read aloud. "How old are you?" The glass slid to the numbers, stopping at 1, 2. 12, Mark whispered. "What happened to you, Max?" The glass paused, then began to move again. DEAD, dead. We all looked at each other, a mix of excitement and fear bubbling up. Tim pressed on, unable to resist the allure of the unknown. "How did you die?" he asked. The glass began to spell something, but before it could finish, the bathroom door creaked open. We jumped, pulling our fingers away from the glass. Mr. Johansson, the janitor, stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What are you kids doing in here?" he barked. "Nothing, sir," Tim said quickly, folding the paper and shoving it into his backpack. "We were just leaving." Mr. Johansson scowled, but stepped aside to let us pass. We hurried out of the bathroom, our hearts pounding. As we walked home, we talked about what just happened. Neither of us thought it would work. It felt unreal, but soon I would find it very real. That night, I found it hard to sleep. My room felt different, heavier somehow. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the afternoon in my mind. Eventually, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a strange noise. It was a faint whisper, barely audible. I sat up, straining to hear. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the corner of my room. I turned on the light, my eyes scanning the room for the source of the noise. There, in the corner, stood a shadowy figure. My heart skipped a beat. It was a boy, about my age, his face pale and his eyes hollow. "Max," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure nodded slowly, then began to fade. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was dreaming. But the next morning, the sense of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Objects in my room would move on their own. I would hear footsteps when no one was there. My parents noticed my jumpiness, but I couldn't tell them what was going on. They'd think I was losing my mind. One afternoon, as I was doing my homework, I heard a faint whisper behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. The whisper grew louder, forming words. "Help me," it said. I spun around, my heart pounding. "Max, is that you?" There was no response, just a cold breeze that sent a chill down my spine. I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. That night, I set up the paper and glass in my room, just as we had done in the bathroom. I placed my finger on the glass and took a deep breath. "Max, are you here?" I asked. The glass moved to, "Yes." "What do you want?" I asked. The glass spelled out Friend, friend. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. The glass moved again, but this time it spelled something different. HELP. "Help with what?" I asked. The glass began to move, but before it could spell anything, my bedroom door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I jumped, knocking the glass to the floor. The whispers started again, louder and more frantic. I covered my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. In a panic, I ran to my parents' room and pounded on the door. They opened it, looking tired. "What's wrong?" my dad asked. "Something's in my room," I cried. "Please, come see." They followed me back to my room, but when we got there, everything was normal. The paper and glass were gone. "See?" my dad said gently. "There's nothing here. You probably just had a bad dream." I knew it wasn't a dream, but I didn't argue. I just nodded and went back to bed, feeling more alone than ever. The haunting continued for weeks. I barely slept, jumping at every sound and shadow. One day, as I was walking to school, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. I started running, my backpack bouncing against my back. When I finally reached my house, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. That night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I set up the paper and glass in my room, just as we had done in the bathroom. I placed my finger on the glass and took a deep breath. "Max, are you here?" I asked with a whisper. The glass moved immediately to yes. "What do you want?" I asked. And again the glass spelled out Friend, friend. I swallowed hard. "Why are you doing this?" The glass moved and spelled once again HELP. "Help with what?" I demanded. The glass started to spell, but before it could finish, my bedroom door slammed shut. I jumped, knocking the glass to the floor. The whispers started again. I ran to my parents' room and pounded on the door. Dad opened it, looking irritated. "What do you want this time?" my dad asked, not too happy to be woken up another night. "Please check my room. There is something there." But when we got to my room, everything was normal, of course. The glass was gone, and the paper was back in my backpack where I had left it. "Come on," my dad said gently. "There's nothing here. You need to stop this." One morning, as I was walking to school, I felt that same cold hand on my shoulder again. This time, I didn't run. I turned around and faced it. "What do you want from me?" I shouted into the empty street. There was no answer, but I felt a sudden sense of calm wash over me. For the first time since that day in the bathroom, I didn't feel afraid. When I got to school, I found Tim, Linnea, and Mark, and told them everything that had happened. To my surprise, they believed me. We decided to perform one last session, hoping to put an end to whatever was haunting me. We gathered in the same bathroom, this time with a sense of purpose. Tim placed the paper on the floor, and we all put our fingers on the glass. "Max, if you're here, please tell us what you want," Tim said. Again, the glass spelled out, "Help." "How can we help you?" I asked. The glass spelled out, "STOP, stop, then SPIRIT, spirit." We looked at each other, confused. "Stop the spirit?" Linnea asked. "How?" The glass moved again, but before it could spell anything, the bathroom door creaked open. We all held our breath, expecting Mr. Johansson to walk in, but the door remained empty. Suddenly, the glass started to shake. The whispers started again, louder and more frantic than ever. We covered our ears, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. In a panic, we grabbed the paper and ran out of the bathroom. We didn't stop running until we were outside the school, gasping for breath. "What do we do now?" Mark asked. "I think we need to destroy the paper," Tim said. "Maybe that will stop whatever's haunting us." We found a lighter and a metal trash can behind the school. Tim unfolded the paper and held it over the flame. The edges curled and blackened, and as the fire consumed the paper, the whispers grew louder, then suddenly stopped. We stared at the smouldering ashes, unsure if we had truly put an end to the haunting. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The strange occurrences stopped, and life slowly returned to normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Max was gone, but I still felt his presence, as if he were watching over me. Years passed, and I grew up, moved away, and started a family of my own. I never forgot about Max or that fateful game we played in the school bathroom. It became a distant memory, a story I kept to myself. One night, as I was tucking my son into bed, he asked me if I believed in ghosts. His question brought back memories I had long buried. "Why do you ask?" I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I heard some kids talking about a game they played at school," he said. "They called it Spirit of the Glass." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't thought about that game in years. I took a deep breath and told my son the story, hoping to teach him the importance of respecting the unknown. When I finished, he looked at me with wide eyes. "Do you think Max is still out there?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do know that we should always be careful when dealing with things we don't understand." He nodded, and I kissed him goodnight, leaving his room with a heavy heart. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a familiar presence. I turned around, half expecting to see Max standing there. But there was nothing, just the faint echo of a whisper in the distance. Max's story may have ended that day in the school bathroom, but his spirit never truly left me. It serves as a reminder of the consequences of playing with forces beyond our comprehension. And even now, decades later, I can still hear his voice, a haunting echo from the past, reminding me that some spirits are never truly at rest. Thanks for listening all the way through. You are awesome. I hope you enjoyed my content. Please like and subscribe. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with eerie tales.